Alright, it's all fun and games being a massive hater and taking joy in the downfall of rival clubs like Arsenal, or even taking a step back to talk about how a team like Real Madrid underperformed massively this year, or even pointing out how bad City was earlier this year. But it's time to finally take a look at the man in the mirror. That's right, the club that I support, that I watch week in and week out, the club that I sometimes wake up at 6 in the morning to watch, is currently having one of the worst seasons in its history, and for sure the worst season in recent history. And realistically, nothing can be done to salvage it. Manchester United, at the point of this recording, is currently sitting in 16th place, just 1 point off of 17th, and really at this point it's a toss-up between us and Spurs to see who finishes in 17th. But regardless, we're probably going to end up as one of the worst 5 clubs in the top flight. And to be honest, over the course of the season, this finish has become more and more obvious, as it felt like things just kept getting worse in one way or another. From top to bottom, this entire season has been a clown show, and I mean that literally. Whether it be the fans, the players, the manager, or the boardroom, almost every single facet of this club is operated in such a bonehead way, and as a result we're in 16th place. Not only are we in 16th place, but we have not at a single point this season been higher than 7th place. 7th place is the highest we've been all season, and that was the first week. We're literally moving like a relegation club. Has there been a few shining lights this season? Of course there has been. There's been a few players that have at least shown passion and generally a much higher standard of play, which is a positive for sure. And of course we are in the Europa League final, which I will touch on shortly, which could have massive implications on the future win or lose. But even then, it would be a lie for anyone to call this season anything other than a massive failure for a multitude of reasons that I'm about to educate you on. Real quick boys, if you're new to the channel, enjoying the video, enjoying the content, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. We're dropping weekly football videos on the channel, so make sure you hit the notification bell as well so you don't miss an upload. And if you're not new to the channel boys, welcome back. Glad to have you around for another video. Let me know your thoughts on United seasons down below. Leave your hate comments, leave your positive comments, any single thing you have to say, leave it down below. That being said boys, let's get into this pathetic season that Manchester United has displayed this year. First things first, and realistically what set everything to go wrong this season was the fact that Ineos decided to keep Ten Hag in the job to start the campaign. To be honest with you, I'm a pretty optimistic person, and more often than not I like to give managers the benefit of the doubt for one reason or another. So considering the context for last season, I was hopeful that Ten Hag would be able to turn things around, but what a dumbass I was, because I literally had almost no reason to even believe this. Ten Hag in his time at the club came with a lot of highs and lows, but really the lows drastically overshadowed the highs. So coming off of last season where he finished in 8th place and crashed out of the Champions League group stages, the club should have taken his FA Cup victory as the perfect opportunity for him to bow out and leave with at least his head held high. This would have allowed for a new manager to come in, identify what players need to leave and to come in to fit the new vision at the club and whatever the new manager would have had in store. Instead, the club renewed his contract for 1 more year, spent about 214 million euros, which at least got us Lene Euro, and gave Ten Hag more time. But even then, it felt half-assed because it constantly felt like he was walking on a tightrope. It doesn't really fill you with a lot of confidence if you're getting your contract extended for just 1 year, and there was already so many rumors about you getting fired to begin with. So with a squad that mostly consisted of the same players from the year before and players that are far from criticism, go figure the club and Ten Hag would struggle. They'd win this season's opener against Fulham 1-0 thanks to a debut goal from Xerxes, which had us in the aforementioned 7th place. But from here, everything fell apart in just the blink of an eye. The players, surprise surprise, continued to pretty much just disappoint, and it looked like they couldn't cope with anything that was coming their way. Ten Hag still essentially would set up his team in the most naive structures that allowed for really any opponent to get at us and damn near get free goals. The results, boy oh boy, how I wish I appreciated that Fulham win more, because that is literally where it peaked for us in the Premier League. At this point, we all know Ten Hag got sacked this season, and of course it's because he lost the dressing room, was seemingly falling out with the board, and as I mentioned, couldn't coach a win to save his life. But to give you perspective for how bad it really was, his record after that Fulham game in all competitions was 3 wins, 5 draws, and 4 losses. So to do the quick math for you, that's 3 wins in 12 matches, a 25% win percentage. And to make the context even worse, those 3 wins were against Southampton, Brentford, and Barnsley. Barnsley is in the 3rd division. Do you hear what I'm saying? The guy had us in 14th place in the Premier League and 21st place in Europa League. He had to go, and after a 2-1 loss to West Ham, Ten Hag would be shipped straight back to the Netherlands, thus ending his reign of terror at the club. But come on now, I know what video you guys clicked on, I know what you guys are watching at this very moment. Things did not get better from here. If anything, they got kind of worse. After Ten Hag got sacked, the club pretty much announced 2 things. Firstly, that Ruud van Nistelrooy would take over as interim manager immediately following Ten Hag's sacking, and secondly, that Ruben Amorim from Sporting would be taken over, being announced just 4 days later. Amorim is a very promising manager and was touted for the work he had done with Sporting up to that point. He had even gotten himself some interviews this past summer as clubs like Liverpool and even United were interested in him. So this was at least a positive when we appointed Ruben Amorim because we actually had something to look forward to. But he would get started at United a few weeks after the announcement as he had some important games that he wanted to finish up with Sporting first. In the meantime, Ruud van Nistelrooy ball would at least see us get back to winning ways in Europe, pick up some important points in the league, and progress in the FA Cup. But Amorim's arrival in late November kind of just complicated things this season a little bit more. See, when he arrived, there was definitely a big sense of optimism across the United fan base. Amorim in his first few interviews for the club spoke with great confidence, and really this is something that lit a fire underneath the fans, especially since we were coming off the tail of Ten Hag, which felt like we were watching a man lose his confidence week in and week out. Were United fans being naive and just buying into whatever a new manager was saying before even seeing any success? Absolutely, but at the point we were at, we were gonna buy anything. And of course, at first, a new manager is gonna be cut a lot of slack because they're coming into a completely different and brand new environment, especially Amorim coming from Sporting, an establishment that had pretty much allowed him to flourish. They backed him 1000%. He was coming into this hellscape at United. The players and the squads that he was taking over were completely different from what he was coming from, so there was of course going to be an adjustment period. But unfortunately for United, because the board decided to bring in Amorim at such a weird point of the season, they pretty much just threw him into the deep end, and it's kind of led to the rest of the season being one big adjustment period. Why, you might be asking yourself? Well, it's because Ruben Amorim plays a 3 at the back system, meaning midfielders and defenders are forced to play extremely different roles, which requires either very high IQ players or good players for that system, something incredibly lacking at United considering Ten Hag was backed and given a squad for a 4 at the back system. From early on, we should have seen how much these players were going to struggle, but unfortunately we kind of ignored that possibility being true because we were just so over Ten Hag. Who would be shocked that players that people already had a disdain for, like Diego Dallo, Victor Lindelof, Rasmus Højlund, would all struggle in this system when they had just been struggling for the last 2 seasons. But with all that being said, it was finally time for Amorim to take over and start his time in the Premier League. His era would get started in a match against Ipswich, and early on it showed signs that maybe this was going to be the turning point for United, especially when Rashford just 2 minutes into the match would get the first goal of this era, and it looked like the team was about to start flying. But it's like after this goal, the players just remembered how they really are, and over the course of the game just didn't show any threat. On top of that, Ipswich would get the equalizer just before halftime and hold on to that, ending the match 1-0. A whimpering end to Amorim's first game, and unfortunately this would end up being a very common theme for the club domestically as the season went on. We have been so pathetic this season and so rotten to the core that we didn't even get the new manager bounce. Things have to be so bad for that to be the case. From Amorim getting started to the end of December, we would struggle greatly domestically. In the Premier League, we'd lose 5 games and win only 2, and in the EFL Cup, we'd get knocked out in the quarterfinals by Spurs after a buy-and-dear special. But interestingly enough, it seemed to be a very stark contrast in Europe because in the Europa League, we'd managed to win 2 matches that we played, albeit against worse opponents, but nonetheless, considering how bad things have gotten, any wins were massive. In that period, Amorim did manage to get a win against City, which did buy him some grace, but it was still looking rough. These same players that had struggled to show any consistency for the last few years were continuing the same trends. It was clear that against Premier League level opponents, these guys were not capable of playing Amorim's system. Of course, you had guys like Diallo and Bruno still managing to ball out, but the rest of the team was drowning quickly. There was hope that in the January transfer window, the club would be smart enough to make something happen and bring in players that were more familiar with this type of system across the pitch. As much as it would have been great to sign established stars, low cost, free transfers, or even loans of players that are just familiar with a system or similar systems would have sufficed. We saw with the arrival of Dorgu for 30 million euros how much having a guy that is familiar with a certain role can increase the effectiveness of the team. Dorgu isn't amazing, he's not world class, he's not anywhere near being the best left back or left wing back in the league, but literally just a guy who is familiar with playing a left wing back role or right wing back role changed the effectiveness of the team so much. And you would think the club would see this and say, okay, you know what, maybe we should get some other players. No, this is literally where the signings ended. We didn't bring in anyone else because we are broke. Add that to the list of more embarrassing things that just happened to United this year. And on top of that, we let players like Rashford, who had fallen out with Amorim, and Anthony leave on loan, which hurt our depth even more. So now for the rest of the season, Amorim had to deal with a dwindled squad that consisted of players who had already shown they were near worthless when it comes to playing in the Premier League. I'm sure you can imagine how things turned out, right? So between the months of January to March, the issues just continued tenfold, specifically in domestic competition. In these 3 months, United would get 4 wins, 3 draws, and 3 losses in the Premier League, which on paper doesn't sound like the worst, but the 4 wins came against Southampton, Fulham, Ipswich, and Leicester. Literally 3 of those teams are the only teams that are worse than us. Granted, in this period, we did see a draw against Liverpool in the Premier League, where the team actually looked like they were up for the challenge, a draw against Arsenal in the Premier League as well, and we did also beat Arsenal in the FA Cup with 10 men. These 3 results all buying Amorim some grace. Although United would get knocked out of the FA Cup 2 rounds later, so what was even the point? But oddly, despite how we were domestically, in this 3-month period, United remained the only unbeaten team in all of European competition, because we rolled through the rest of our games in the group stage undefeated, and we finished in 3rd place, securing a spot in the round of 16. And then after that, we would face Real Sociedad, which was seen as a big test, but after some Amorim and Bruno Black magic, United will win 5-2 on aggregate and punch a ticket into the next round. The underlying issue stayed the same in these 3 months. This system against teams in the Premier League was just not working, and it was all compounded by just how bad these players were in their specific roles. And really, during this 3-month period, despite the fact that Amorim was only just getting started in his role, there started to become a big sentiment that maybe this guy just wasn't good enough, or his system is not good enough to be what we needed to be. So we already had to suffer through Ten Hag at the beginning of the season and watch him get sacked and see the club go into turmoil. We brought in a new manager, all for everyone to hit the panic buttons a couple months into his tenure. And all throughout this time, the team was just kind of bouncing between 15th and 12th place. It was always 1 step forward and 5 steps back, making every game feel like more and more of an embarrassment. And that's just from January to March. Over these last 2 months, we've seen this idea come to a head. See, it was already bad that the club re-signed Erik ten Hag and threw so much money away in the summer just to sack him 9 games into the season. It was already bad enough that we signed the 3 at the back manager and left him to drown. It was already bad enough that we had a squad that was so expensive, full of players. It was already bad enough that we were so low on the table. But guys, Manchester United has not won a game in the Premier League since we beat Leicester 3-0. It's been 7 games since, and in those 7 games, we have 2 draws and 5 losses. That is so pathetic. That is literally the definition. There's no word to describe how bad this team's been in the Premier League. It's like as soon as these guys step foot on a pitch and enter Premier League game, these guys just don't give a damn. And granted, over the last 2 games, we have seen some tinkering from Amorim for a reason that I'll get into in just a second, but that's still no excuse for how bad these guys have been. And yet somehow, some way, we find ourselves in the Europa League final against Spurs. After knocking out Real Sociedad, United had Lyon in the quarterfinal. The first leg would see a 2-2 draw in France, as an Onana stinker allowed Lyon to go back to Old Trafford with the belief of a win. What happened next can only be described as a football match on some special substances, because I don't even know what I watched even to this day. United, after taking a 2-0 lead, went down 4-2 on the day, and then clawed the game back at the death and won 5-4 on the day to win 7-6 on aggregate. And then after this, United would have to face Athletic Bilbao, which was by far their hardest test in the Europa League yet. 4th place in La Liga, the best defense in La Liga. It felt like this could finally be the end of the road for this United team. But ultimately, they would show up for the occasion. They delivered a 3-0 pounding to Athletic Bilbao away from home, and then a 4-1 beating at Old Trafford to win 7-1 on aggregate and punch their ticket into the final. So despite how bad this team has been, and how good the players are, and how many bad decisions the club makes, there's still a chance United end up with a European trophy and a spot in the Champions League next season. And as great as this sounds, I have my problems with this. See, we've reached a point in the season where it kind of just feels very, very, very make or break. Had we finished, I don't know, even 8th place, no European trophy, there's at least a belief that we go into the next season, we pick up the right building blocks, we go from there. At this point, we're going to finish 15th, 16th, or 17th, and we either get a European trophy or we don't. We lose that match and it's going to feel like all hell is going to break loose. There's too much of a weight put onto this match for my liking. Am I confident that we're going to win? Yes, but at the same time, we're playing an English team in the final. We have struggled a lot against English teams. We've lost to Spurs 3 times. All of those matches have their own context, but but there's no guarantee that we're gonna win that match. We've been great in these cup competitions. Amorim has been great at setting up sides for specific occasions, but even then, we don't know what's gonna happen. And of course, I'm talking about the negative side, right? We could lose. This could have a detrimental impact on transfers and player mentality and manager mentality and a whole bunch of things. But even if we win, if we don't actually ride the momentum positively, next season we're just gonna crash and burn. If we win and we don't actually bring in the targets that we need, what was the point of it all? Meaning, if we don't get rid of the right players and actually sign the right players and implement this system as we should, we're just gonna end up low in the table again, embarrassed next season out of the Champions League. For me, there's just too much of importance put on this match at this point of the season, considering everything else that has happened. Of course, I hope we win. I really hope we win, but who knows? It is all up in the air. There has literally been almost nothing positive to take away from the season. Bruno has been world class in this team, and if it wasn't for him, we probably would have gotten relegated. Amad Diallo's been great this season. Lenny Yoro's been great this season. We're in a final. Really, those are the only positives. Like I said, you guys can let me know what you think in the comments down below. All I know is, despite everything I've said, United is probably going to win the final.